Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's Ukraine War Frontline update for the 10th of September 2023. I'm going to go through, as you would expect, the frontline changes. There aren't too many changes from what I said earlier on today. I've said this the last couple of days. I think the front lines have become somewhat attritional in certain places. However, there is some movement here and there. Let's go first of all to the northeast sector, the Kupiansk to Svatovo to Crimea front line or axis, where the Russians are claiming to make some marginal advances, I think, in the Sinkivka, Petropavlivka area. So that's up here towards Kupiansk. So around this sector, but that's not confirmed by anyone else. It's just some of the Russian claims, and their claims are from both sides. You know, repelled attacks all the way down here, including in the Torska Serebryansky forest area as well. So I would say the usual claims around that. Really, it's going to start having anything of particular interest around Bakhmut. So Bakhmut is sort of a third of the way down this eastern front line in Donetsk Oblast, and the Russians, some Russian sources claiming some marginal Russian advances in the Orokovo-Vasilivka area up here. I don't know whether that's worth taking seriously at all or not. No mapping changes that I'm aware of. Just a sort of general, yeah, we've done this, we've done that, but no real evidence. There is, I mean, you've got Syriac maps. Oh, it reminds me, I need to show you my map legend. If you don't know what my map means, please pause the video and look at what the different lines represent, different colors represent on my map. But anyway, back to normal. Here we have the dark blue pin of the pro-Russian map of Syriac maps, indicating that the small village of Andriivka, just sort of 3 or 4 roads there, and a small number of houses, that has been liberated, as according to many sources. Although I would still suggest it's a grey zone. Russian artillery is still active here, even though they do complain about a lack of counter-battery fire. Even yesterday, Rybar, the pro-Russian source, very pro-Russian source, was saying that the Ukrainians had liberated Andriivka. So that is generally accepted at the moment. As for other gains in the area, there are general claims of Ukrainian gains from the general staff over the last 24 hours in the Bakhmut direction. I would suggest, a bit of speculation, I would suggest that Klishchivka is pretty much cleared out of Russians and Andriivka as well. The Ukrainians will be wanting to exploit this area of the railway line and the sort of windbreaks of the 2 tree lines going either side of the railway line as that comes up and curls around to the north of Klishchivka. I expect the Ukrainians to be trying to exploit this advantage they have garnered in the area to the south of Andriivka and push the Russians back in order to break through that defensive line. And it's going to be about Kurdyumivka now, because Andriivka and Klishchivka, I think, are fairly safely in the hands of the Ukrainians. For what it's worth, of course, these will be essentially rubble. Klishchivka was all about the higher ground to the west, this trench line sitting on a higher ground that overlooks Klishchivka, and I think the Ukrainians have safely had that for some time now. It's just been a matter of time before clearing out the Russians there. It's going to be about Kurdyumivka. So we see, I'd expect possibly a push up by the Ukrainians northwards from south of Ozaryanivka, as they have got across the canal here and moved to this area of the railway line again, and I think they're able to push up there possibly at the moment. So this was a scene of some success near the railway line about 2 or 3 days ago. So I expect they're going to bring that together with a push to the north of Kurdyumivka and maybe seek to get some kind of encirclement going there. But these things take time. I think we might have been victim of thinking that counteroffensives involve huge amounts of mechanized equipment and troops, and you flush out and you know, a massive attack on all these places. They don't have the resources to do that kind of stuff, especially in the Bakhmut area where they are trying to not use counter-offensive resources. So these are using, you know, troops that are already stationed around here, maybe Konstantinivka. This is why Konstantinivka keeps getting hit, because it's a kind of staging post for Bakhmut, and Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, all these kind of areas around here. They'll be using the troops that they have been rotating, although there are claims that they don't rotate enough in the Bakhmut area and it's been really difficult. But they will be using those troops to do this and not kind of trying to flash out the Russians with an excess, kind of Pyrrhic victory, a 3-1 advantage or whatever. So it is grinding and it's slow, but the Ukrainians do have the momentum and the advantage. It's just even to take a small village like Andriivka takes time. Klishchiivka has taken weeks to overcome, right? And that is not a huge place, although it's topographically quite interesting. But yeah, it's not quick stuff, this counter-offensive, when the Russians have had months and months to dig in. And that's the same, up and down the front lines. Right, okay, we're going to come down to Avdiivka at the moment. Now, Andrew Perpetua, the blue line represented on my map as a blue line, has shown maybe some rejigs, maybe some gains for the Ukrainians in a slightly different place. As to what we have seen. So that is to the east of Avdiivka. And so a little bit of a rejig of the map there. Not actually as far back as the Russian defensive lines of Suryat maps here, but Suryat maps hasn't changed any of their kind of eastern Avdiivka lines for an awful long time. All right, then we come down to the south of Avdiivka, or south of the city. I don't know if it's a city, it's a kind of suburb of Donetsk city. And then it's all about Opytny. So Suryat Maps, as you can see here, has agreed that the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back. They rejigged the map yesterday to show some Russian gains, but then I think I couldn't quite understand that. Anyway, they seem to have changed it today. Now, the claims about Opytny this morning and over the day were that Ukrainian forces were able to take the initiative at the Avdiivka front and push Russian forces all the way back to Opytny and even contest the northern part of the village. Fierce battles are taking place. I think that was kind of yesterday's news, fierce battles in the north. This is Tim White earlier today saying Ukraine's military confirmed it had entered Opytny, so the general staff were admitting this 2 days ago when Russia stormed positions in the north of the city. We conducted a brilliant operation and occupied a part of the Opytny. So basically, there was a lightning attack that took place as a result of a kind of distraction. Of the way I understand it is the Russians were attacking to the north, and the Ukrainians claimed that they then did a lightning attack to the south when the Russians weren't kind of expecting it, and had quite significant success in doing so. Global War Monitor here says Ukraine has advanced further. This is coming out today, this afternoon, has advanced further and has entered the settlement of Opytny. Well, that's kind of what we knew anyway. Oblast, thanks to a flag launched from Avdiivka, the village is now contested. So, yeah, that's gone. They think the village is contested, although they are also admitting that Russia controlled the southern part of that. And Russian sources are complaining that Opytny is under Ukrainian control. It's the latest I've heard from this afternoon, although we often hear things like this and they aren't true. So take that with a massive pinch of salt. I can't find the source I had that was talking about the lightning attack. No. There are some details somewhere. Sorry, I've lost my source now. But there were details of indeed this kind of distraction lightning attack into Opytny, and so that I do understand that is what's happened. It could be that Opytny is under Ukrainian control, but each time I say that, a village after it's just been attacked is suddenly under Ukrainian control, it's very rarely true. As I said earlier, Klishchiivka took how long to take, and that's not a huge place. Andriivka itself, just 3 roads smaller than Opytny, has taken a few days or it depends how long you kind of assess the beginning and end of taking these places, but you could say a week to take that. So Opytny going in a single day, considering it's been the kind of almost the center of activity for so long, it's highly unlikely the Russians would be pushed out that quickly, but it might have happened. Likewise, there's been some success towards Pisky and Pervomaisky here, where the Ukrainians, this is Suryat Maps, is emitting some gains here for the Ukrainians. In fact, I think Andrew Perpetua has some things to say about that. Yeah, so this is almost from a day ago. I could have reported this yesterday, actually, but didn't. In Pervomaisky, which is near Donetsk, the line changed with respect to the new view of Russian shelling, about 0.69 square kilometers. I might have said that yesterday, actually, gained by the Ukrainians. So this is Surya Maps, I think, reacting to this kind of gain there, which is indicated on my map by that dark blue pin. So as you can see, Andrew Perpetua has the Russian line further back than Surya Map. So they're still not quite aligning there, but I think this is quite important. I think it shows that the Ukrainians have momentum around here, have the initiative around Pervomaisky and Novelsky, and this has been so hotly contested for a long time, this long thin settlement of Pervomaisky. We've seen tank battles there like 6 months ago. This is all flattened. It's like a hellscape. It's kind of like Mariinka here. And we saw, huge Russian tank attacks into Pervomaisky and all there's firing going on and all sorts of crazy footage. And then now we seem to be right back here again. So the Russians really have lost some initiative around here. And the Ukrainians have gained not only around Novelsky, but also going towards Pisky. I think this is an interesting place and something worth watching. The Ukrainians can have some joy here and at Opitny, it would have potentially have quite a bit of effect elsewhere. So you might get Russians suddenly going, oh my goodness, right, we've got some issues here because we don't want Vodyane to be encircled in some kind of pincer movement. So you might see the Russians pulling back some of their forces from around Krasnohorivka, maybe Novobakhmativka, bring them back around here, and then does that make these places weak? But even if they pull reserves in here to shore up this area, if the reserves aren't coming from deep reserves, right, if they are coming from elsewhere on the front line, then that does have a meaningful effect. So it might not be that the Ukrainians end up taking this area, that they get stopped by the Russians reinforcing here, but it's like, what is the effect of the Russians reinforcing those positions? Does that have a knock-on effect elsewhere? And that plays to the Ukrainians' advantage elsewhere. Okay, so we're going to come down from this kind of area. So remember that could be that Opitny is now under Ukrainian control. We're going to go to, just flicking around there. We're going to go to the southern Donetsk area. Don't know too much about what's going on in Vuhledar or surrounding area. I'm just going to have a look in ISW from last night, see if there's anything. So no, not too much to mention. So we will start in the Novomayorsky area. So Novomayorsky is to the west of this Velika Novosilka salient there, what the Russians sometimes call the Vremivka sector, because of the town just to I thought Vremivka was around there. Is it further north? Anyway, somewhere. Oh yeah, there it is, just to the south of Velika Novosilka. So that's this area here. Anyway, Ukrainians have had some gains in Novomayorsky. If you remember yesterday, they had got into the northern area. There's geolocation of them moving from here to there and then being sort of attacked by Russian shelling. So we know they definitely had control of this area, which made Surya Maps push their mapping back a little bit later than Andrew Perpetua. So that is Surya Maps adaptation. And then Andrew Perpetua today showing that actually they've advanced into northern Novomayorsk, which I said yesterday. I was fairly certain that there was presence of the Ukrainians yesterday here. So that is good that my speculations are correct. I only say that because sometimes I doubt myself, imposter syndrome and whatnot. Anyway, I think this is going to be really, it's going to be an area where the Ukrainians are really going to want to push the Russians out. I think this might be a significant victory for them if they can liberate this in timely fashion, and it might mean that Novodonetsk ends up falling quite quickly, and Kremenchuk could be next. And you see with the success they've had in Shevchenko recently that actually suddenly you could have a really significant push of the Ukrainians here. So I think that is more significant than you might otherwise think. But that said, all these fields around here, of course, are going to have dugouts and whatnot. It's whether they are all effectively manned. So anyway, a global war monitor said, was this yesterday? Yesterday that Ukraine has entered the settlement of Novomayorsk and 5 square kilometers were added to liberated status. That's what I said this morning. And then there was this Russian source that came out, basically that they feel that the Moscow boys are on their own in this area. There's a high level of anxiety for the Russians. Ukrainians have mined the rear and the Ural truck has been destroyed. There are non-stop assaults, including at night. So what do they say? On Novomayorsk, the topographical situation more complicated. It is in a lowland and visible from all sides. Let's just have a quick look at that. unfortunately I can't accentuate my topography here. So if there's a slight incline, you're unlikely to see it. So as you can maybe work out, there's a little bit of a height difference going up here. It is in a dip here. It goes up a little bit there. So if you look at the bottom of my screen, that gives you the height of the land. So we've got sort of up over there, it's 158 meters. Down in Novomyorsk, it's 127 meters. So it does go up as you go to the north, and as you go to the west, it does go up. We've got 140 meters up here, whereas it's 130, 120, whatever it was around in Novomyorsk. So that does seem like it's true that it is in a lowland. I mean, it's not incredibly there's not an incredible difference between the heights, but it is significant enough to be of note. Obviously, the Russians complaining about that. The enemy combines artillery strikes with infantry drops in combat vehicles, which we've actually seen footage of, continuing to do this at night. The word persistence does not reflect this state. Frenzy is more suitable. So that's an interesting piece of terminology. It is with such hysterical frenzy that the Ukrainian, tries to snatch at least a piece and goes to any lengths to do this. Yesterday, remote mining of our rear areas was very active. Charged drones regularly flew out to hunt. Everything was done to make it as difficult as possible for us to communicate with positions. So electronic warfare is really hampering communications, and we've actually heard this as well. So there was a bit of footage that has come out. It's actually from July, and it's not around here, I don't think, but just to give you a sense of how important a lack of communication is. What happened is there was I think I've got this in my extra to talk about, but anyway, I'll say it now. There was a position, I think it might be in a Robotyne area, where, let's just imagine here, so the Russians were here, right, and the Ukrainians were only like 200 meters north of them, and were attacking, but they had absolutely hammered the Russians with electronic warfare, so they couldn't communicate, and the artillery was called in and basically absolutely hammered the Russian lines, and the Ukrainians just sat back and watched it for 2 hours. And because the Russians were unable to communicate to their own artillery that they were actually hitting them, because they were that close anyway, there was nothing that the Russians could do. And you got drone footage like seeing like the sheer volume of artillery that was going on and the devastation it was causing to the Russians' own lines, right? So that's how important electronic warfare is. If you can do it well, then people can't communicate with each other. This happened in Soledar to the Ukrainians, where the Russians hammered Ukrainian communications, if I remember correctly, and the Ukrainians didn't know what the next unit next door was doing, so there's no kind of communication and no kind of cohesion to how they were defending Soledar, and that really didn't help them in defending Soledar, and part of the reason why, you know, they didn't succeed in that defense. So anyway, that's really important, is what I'm saying. Electronic warfare is such a vital component to this war. Anyway, another Ural was burned for us, but it's not fatal. The main thing, the people remain safe. So obviously it was the vehicle that's destroyed, not the people. In general, we are fighting. So in general, we're fighting. So it's not looking great there for the Russians. What else was I going to pick up on that? I think also the idea that drones are just everywhere, spotting for the Ukrainian artillery, able to cut. Oh, that was it. That's what I said this morning, cutting off ground lines of communication. So in the way that the Ukrainians hammered the Russians in Klishchivka, but by first cutting off the ground lines of communication, so there's no way to supply the troops there and no way to get medevacs going, and etc. It then leaves these guys on their own. So when it says the Moscow boys feel like they're on their own, this is kind of the idea, is you cut them off and then you hit them with precision artillery, and they just don't want to be there, and eventually they'll pull out. The ISW, Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank, talked about geolocation to prove that there is Ukrainian advances in this area. Well, this is the geolocation here that suggests that the Ukrainians are here because they are getting shelled by the Russians, so Russian artillery shelling Ukrainian positions. Let's see where this is. Remember, this is probably going to be 24 to 36 hours away. So yeah, that was the footage I was telling you about yesterday, that I showed you yesterday. So that's exactly what we saw, and that was advanced last night, because that's when the ISW put that together. They'll be producing their next report only in a couple of hours anyway, so that's why I'm not really going through it with a fine-tooth comb. Right, then we move on to the west. Syriac map shows a bit of an improvement for the Russians around Priyut now. I don't think that's the last 24 hours. I think that's catching up with what Andrew Perpetua told us, although Syriac maps is somewhat more charitable to the Russians there than Andrew Perpetua, so we'll see. But that I was saying that's a shame that the Ukrainians have lost some ground that they had otherwise gained in the Priyutne to Staromilsk axis. But are the Russians using more energy and resources and troops than it is worth? So when they do these counterattacks, do they leave themselves open to being exhausted and more vulnerable to a subsequent Ukrainian counterattack? Then there are seemingly some Russian gains, as according to Syriac maps, in this area between between Priyutne and Marfapil. I've not heard about this anywhere else, so that's from Syriac maps. No information on that, but it could be somewhere to look out for. When we come to Robertina, or however you want to pronounce it, this is a case of the Ukrainians making small gains still, I think, particularly in the grey zone, so it might not be signified by a movement in the defensive lines as according to Andrew Perpetua, but there is an improvement there. So Andrew Perpetua, if I find it, he says, so based on satellite images and video, I decided to update my map around Robotina to this. In other words, there is significant gains and consolidation for the Ukrainians, but it hasn't changed the Russian defensive line. And he has sort of geolocated rationale for that, and then he's gone on to say just now he said, well, actually yesterday I was debating upon updating my map to this because I was certain Ukraine was in these locations, but I chickened out and posted a more conservative update. Today videos came out showing that even this wasn't aggressive enough. So again, it doesn't really change the Russian defensive lines, but he's saying the Ukrainians are even more successful in taking grey zone area, contested areas, and turning that into consolidated Ukrainian control. So again, they have made gains, the Ukrainians here, but you might not see it in a movement of Russian defensive lines, although Syriac map has moved their Russian defensive lines back, but I think it's just a case of lagging behind someone like Andrew Perpetua, although an interesting difference to the east of Novopokrovka, where Syriac map seems to think the Russians have been pushed further back here, and this is, I think, a key area there. There are some claims that there's fighting on the eastern outskirts of Novopokrovka as well. So the claims from kind of yesterday through today were that the Ukrainians were advancing in the area of Novopokrovka. Here, the claim is from Getty that that is close to the Dragon's Teeth and the defensive line of the Russian forces as well. Pay attention to the positions of the Ukrainians in landing and the Dragon's Teeth. The distance is about 50 to 100 meters. So in other words, they are driving up to only about 15 meters away from the Dragon's Teeth and then going by foot. This is in a different place because they've obviously already sort of overcome the Dragon's Teeth in this area over here. So as it comes down, then there are other areas they will need to sort of overcome the Dragon's Teeth and that tank ditch. Anyway, the Ukrainian Armed Forces, says Flash News, have advanced a further 1.5 kilometers in Robotina region. So that was really from yesterday. I don't have too much information on the latest in Robotina right now. There is some geolocation from Ukrainian tanks doing some fighting, and this is what I talked about this morning, that there's some footage of Ukrainian tanks, T-64s, fighting in this area to the northeast of Novopokrovka, just around here. And basically the tanks were moving in along these sort of tree lines, which means that this is, you would assume, not really contested. That's where the Ukrainians are kind of freely driving their tanks and firing at positions down in Novopokrovka, at least according to these kind of geolocations. So tank fires hit here, and there, and so one would assume that actually the Russians are further back than maybe all the mappers here, including Andrew Perpetua. So Andrew Perpetua has a Russian defensive line where the tanks were driving. So I think Andrew Perpetua might well change that over his next sort of mapping update, although he's only recently done a mapping update. So I'm not really sure why that's not taken into account. Maybe he hasn't seen those sources. I would suggest that the Russian front line or defensive line, sorry, is somewhere back here. Anyway, moving on. The update, one of the later ones from this morning. From this morning, Ukrainians are not only pressing forward, but are also trying to widen the wedge created into the Russian defense. So I talked about this morning, how if you want to be able to supply your troops on a front line, you need to have a much wider bridgehead, much wider salient, because otherwise, as you, if you take it for what they've got now, if the Ukrainians were wanting to supply troops down, at the bottom of this salient as they're doing their active maneuvers, and you want to get them ammunition and supplies and whatnot. Well, actually, you can easily hit that area with ATGM from one side as well as from the other side, right? So that means that is, it is risky. It's vulnerable if your ground lines of communication are going to be under pretty easy fire control. I'm not really talking about artillery here. I'm just talking about ATGMs and mortar fire as well. So really, what you want to have is a salient that looks more like that, and then you can start much more easily supplying the middle of your salients and so on and so forth. So that's what they're going to want to do, widen it out. That's what this source is saying. Reports of attacks on Kopani, Novoprokopivka, and Verbovy. So that is, just to let you know, Kopani is this settlement over here, Novoprokopivka and Verbovy. So there's activity around all those three. If Verbovy falls, it puts the Russian forces north of it in a difficult situation. That's towards a place called Novoprokovka, so Verbovy is there, and you've got a village called Novoprokovka, not Novoprokopivka. That would become somewhat, encircled if Verbovy was to fall, and the Ukrainians could move down this line towards Pavlivka, and that would cause some problems for the Russians going forward. The idea is probably to force a retreat so that Ukrainian forces don't need to fight through the minefields north of Verbovy. That would offer about a 25-kilometer wide gap into the Russian defense. The obvious idea is to be able to bring artillery and air defense systems closer to Tokmak to offer cover when the Surovikin line can be completely overcome. I don't know, but I think Tokmak is the target in that area. Don't know where he's going with that. So, and this is a Russian source saying in the Zaporizhzhia direction, the Ukrainian armed forces with artillery support attacked Kopani from the east and Novoprokopivka, that's the Russian transliteration, from the northeast. There's progressed in the last section. So saying that the Ukrainians are attacking Kopani from this direction and Novoprokopivka from this direction, and they're having success in the latter case on Novoprokopivka. Anyway, then there were claims, and I don't know what to make of this, and not heard anything else of this, that the Russians are bringing a lot of reserves and counterattacking the flank between Verbovy and Novoprokopivka. So this is to claim that actually in this area, the Russians may be having some success in a counterattack. Maybe making some gains, but I've not seen that anywhere else. To pull back our forces, which are moving in the south of Robotyne, Zaporizhzhia direction, realities. I'm not quite sure the translation of that, but it's probably saying the reality is it's difficult for the Ukrainians. It could well be. I think there'll be a lot of push and shove going on while there's a general move forward for the Ukrainians, and they will make gains over time. In certain areas, they will be pushed back as the Russians counterattack, as they consistently counterattack when they lose ground. Seems to be what they do, and then you wait for them to exhaust themselves on a counterattack, and then you counter them. Anyway, Global War Monitor here says a small advance of Ukraine's soldiers has been noted between Robotyne and Novoprokopivka. So that's on that northeastern corner where they're attacking from. That is just here. So again, I think that's referring to that kind of tank battle. So if you see, that's where it's not a tank battle, it's where the Ukrainian tanks were active and firing from. So I think that's in that area actually. No, I could be wrong. So they just consolidated further north of there then. So sorry, I correct myself there. And that's that section of the front line. There's not too much to mention, I think, in the ISW, other than the general comment here, which is I think worth knowing. The Ukrainian General Staff and the UK MOD stated that Russian forces have deployed units, including elements of relatively elite VDV formation, so they're airborne, they're paratroopers, to western Zaporizhia Oblast to replace degraded units operating near Robotyne. And a Ukrainian source stated that 2 regiments of the 76th Guards Air Assault, which we knew, division, have arrived in the Tokmak area. The commitment of some of the Russian military's most capable formations or limited counterattacks in this critical sector of the front will likely attrit these formations further. It's nothing we didn't already know. In fact, I think it's a bit behind the curve because we've already got evidence in the trenches that the 76th have been fighting here. So it's not just that they've been brought from Crimea or Bakhmut or wherever and are now sort of holding up in Tokmak ready to be sent to the front lines. I think there was evidence, last week that they were already there. But anyway, that's that. I just thought I'd share that with you from the ISW. And then we're going to go on to Kherson now. Where I don't know. Okay, let's read this. So, ISW says a Russian mill blogger claimed that small groups of Ukrainians landed on areas in Dnipro River on September the 8th. So, a couple of days ago now, Russian mill blogger claimed that 12-person Ukrainian force landed on the eastern part of Oleshkivsky Island, and a 10-person Ukrainian force landed near the Antonivsky rail bridge in Pridniprovsk. On the night of September the 8th. Right, that latter bit might well refer to this. Oh, no, wrong one. This one. So, Ukraine once again has crossed the Dnipro and formed another bridgehead. So, remember the Antonivsky bridge here. They've got a bridgehead there, where they've been holed up for some time now, hammered by the Russian aviation that drops FAB 500s on here regularly. They still appear to be there. So I'm going to come out of that. I don't know anything about the attack toward Luhove that we heard about yesterday in the Kamyanska area. So we'll see if anything develops there. But now we'll go down to past Kozachi Lahiri and down to the Antonivsky Bridge area. So the idea is that the Ukrainians are still present there, but they've landed another place about 2 kilometers away. So let's measure that here. Yep, so there's 2 kilometers. And the claim here, as I was saying, is that they formed another bridgehead on the Russian-occupied side of the river. Ukraine will try to link this bridgehead with the Dacha one. So it's the Dacha one here by the bridge, if not done already. These two are less than 2 kilometers apart. So they've landed somewhere around here and formed another bridgehead. And that means pretty much this whole area might well be under the control of the Ukrainians. What they do with that, we shall see. Anyway, that's the Frontline update for today. I'm going to try and get you an extra just now. See if I have time to do that. Really appreciate all your support. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. And take care, and I'll speak to you soon.